Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.World and our special broadcast that we do each Friday on the impacts of the coronavirus in South Seattle and surrounding communities. As we initially started this, our focus was to ensure that we shared the voices, the narrative, and what was taking place in South Seattle. We talked to educators, we talked to business owners, we talked to individuals. We had folks on our program who were COVID-19 positive before they were even saying uh, this was impacting South Seattle. And because of that, our listenership has grown. We've become a trusted resource and will continue to be that trusted resource for you. We've also expanded that outreach to other communities, and we're hearing from Bremerton and Edmonds and Tacoma and Lacey and just Yakima. A little later on the show today, the mayor of Yakima will be joining us. Earlier, we had City Council member Jason White from Yakima and Spokane. And if you're out there listening and you want to share what's going on with you, share your narrative, share your story, hit us up at Rainier Avenue Radio world@gmail.com, and we'd love to share whatever it is that's going on with you, whether it is your personal tragedy or your stories of success or just day to day how this is impacting you, your business, etc. Give us a shout at Rainier Avenue Radio world@gmail.com, and we'll work it out for you. We'll get it on the air. Joining me on the program right now is Mr. Cliff Cawthon. Cliff, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Tony. Hello.
Cliff is the host of a long-running show, popular show on Rainier Avenue Radio, Politics Off the Cuff, which we stopped momentarily as we figured out how to adhere to the social distancing. Politics Off the Cuff is back on the air now. Cliff,
Yes.
good to have you back on the air.
Yes, and it's good to be on the air, sir. And I must say, I'm honored to be here and continually learn from your amazing cadence on the radio. So kudos to you, sir.
Well, Cliff, you are now our representative and ambassador to the King County Social Equity and Justice uh, COVID-19 Recovery Task Force. That's just a mouthful of a title to start with. But let's talk about that. You had your first meeting.
Mhm.
Kind of share with us, for folks who don't even know what I'm talking about when I give that long title, King County Social Justice and Equity and Social Justice COVID-19 Recovery Task Force, what it is, who's involved, what took place at the meeting, what your thoughts are.
Okay, so I'll try to answer those just in that exact order, sir. So, the COVID, so to back it up, the Office of Equity and Social Justice, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated, but also one of the most vital agencies there is at King County. So, the office is, well, just as it sounds, committed to equity as well as the values of social justice in both equipping county departments and agencies to see to essentially look through their policies and to make them more equitable while doing so with a social justice lens. And it is often a how should I put this? It's often a really un under underrated. It's often underrated function. I think they do a lot of great work, and what we're doing as a part of this task force is attempting to really live to that, to speak to that by bringing together stakeholders from historically marginalized and underrepresented groups. So, for example, our radio station that we broadcast across the sound, we broadcast across the country. We're syndicated, and also if we look at hosts like myself, like you, like all of our hosts, we all come from a diverse um, range of backgrounds, racially, in terms of gender, sexual identity, so on and so forth. So this task force in particular has a focus on historically marginalized groups and immigrant and refugee populations who are being disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak. And this past week, our first meeting was an introductory meeting where essentially all the stakeholders came together and got the information we needed in order to come back to our constituencies. So for me to come back to my people here at Rainier Avenue Radio and to essentially connect with them on what we can do in order to not just uh, to spread good information but to tackle misinformation as well as to provide services to our community. So where we go from here, in a couple of weeks I presume we will be checking in and we'll have some more data on what we can do in order to fight COVID-19, on what the county is doing, as well as be able to provide some analysis of where the county and where cities need to do better when it comes to equitably treating their constituents.
Yeah, this is Tony B. I'm talking with Cliff Cobb. You should have your own radio show. Anybody ever told you that?
I talked to Tony B. I mean, he might be able to hook me up.
Cliff,
Yeah, but I got to take care of all the ums and ahs first, and all the kind of awkward starts, and then I think I might be worthy then.
you're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio World, and yes, if that voice sounds familiar, it is your neighborhood agitator, Cliff Cawthon, host of Politics Off the Cuff, which can be heard live every Thursday at 3:30. Cliff, let's talk a little bit about your show and what you do with your show, what the goal is, what you try to accomplish with your time on the airwaves.
It actually, and I really appreciate that question. And always, I really appreciate the opportunity to, spread the gospel of politics off the cuff because for pretty much all my adult life, I've worked in some form of advocacy, right? That's my house. I live there, play there, die there, right? In terms of advocating for people who have been historically marginalized, like myself as a black man in this country, and how we continue to be marginalized, as well as bring on unique voices that are doing policy work in our community. And so they can tell some of the stories, and also they can have a dialogue with myself, with members of the community about the issues that matter to them, right? So all in all, the politics off the cuff is exactly what it sounds like. It's politics, but not in either the sanitized or the, kind of, or through the lens of the commercial rage machines that we have on, on television or on the radio. So stay away from AM radio, tune into Rainier Avenue Radio for your weekly bit of political commentary, analysis, and fun, you know?
Uh, Cliff, explain to us. We heard at the beginning of this that we're all in this together. Why is there a need? And again, Cliff Cawthon is our Rainier Avenue Radio representative and ambassador to the King County Office of Equity and Social Justice COVID-19 Recovery Task Force. Why is there a need for something specific to take a look at immigrants, refugees, marginalized communities, social justice and equity during something that we're being told we're all in together? Why is there a specific need for this task force that you are now part of?
Well, because we're kind of all in this together. Kind of. So let me break that down. Yes, COVID-19 is a threat to everyone. That just one of my students. So I actually my kind of my day job is as a adjunct professor over at Bellevue College, and one of my students, he actually asked me recently what to say to his family member in Texas that essentially says, well, COVID-19 only threatens white people, so therefore I don't really need any of the social distancing stuff, or to put on a mask, or to use gloves in public spaces. And some of my response to him essentially was, well, amongst particularly folks of color, that we're seeing higher rates of infection, higher rates of preventable death, and also this is that kind of pseudoscience in the past has been used as a way to justify denying us care, cruel treatment, pseudoscientific experiments, as well as pseudoscientific rhetoric that has essentially enable the public to see us as less than human. So bringing it back to why we're kind of all in this together. A, it does affect the entire public, but B, it, like with everything, affects certain segments of the public differently because we've never had a society where freedom, equality, justice for all has been truly universal, and we continuously live with the legacy of that. And C, when it comes to when it comes to the response, as we've seen at a federal level, I mean, to be blunt, the response is just it is I wish I could call it a joke, but it is dangerously negligent and vicious when it comes to the level of partisanship and level of disregard for vulnerable people when it comes to federal response. And four, apropos to the, or rather D, apropos to the lackluster federal response, that states are trying to catch up. So for us here locally, this is really a gut check moment for our so-called progressive values here, in Seattle and King County and Martin Luther King Jr. County, I should add, in Washington State. Right, this is a moment where local authorities really do have to step up because, as we've seen at the top, Orange Skull, as he's been called by some friends and commentators, has signaled a number of times the lack of the intent to shortchange us on a federal response. So hopefully it answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, you're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio World. This is our special impacts of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities edition that we do every Friday. And joining me on the phone, if it sounds familiar, yes, that is Cliff Cawthon from Politics Off the Cuff. Also, he is Rainier Avenue Radio's ambassador and representative to the King County social, I got to get this right, social equity and social justice COVID-19 recovery task force. And Cliff, I'd like you to go take us into politics off the cuff for a minute. What I would like to do right now is get your opinion on this concept of easing restrictions, where you have a maybe very small but very vocal group of folks who want stay-at-home restrictions that were imposed by Governor Inslee to be eased. Folks are suffering from businesses that are not open and they can't work there, and the business owners are losing money. On the other hand, we have health experts that are warning us that nothing has changed, that going back to life is what you want to call normal could potentially be
Right.
disastrous. As a matter of fact, I believe it was Dr. Bright who recently said this could be the darkest fall that we've seen. Your thoughts, Mr. Cawthon, on
Yes,
this
sir.
concept of opening up the economy, people getting back to work, people going back to restaurants and bars, schools starting again,
Hmm.
versus paying close attention to what the health experts are telling us could happen if we are not extremely careful with this coronavirus.
Of course. And first of all, part of this COVID-19 response and recovery task force, I urge people to email you, of course. I don't know if you've already given a shout out for your email address. So I'll, I
Rainier
am,
Avenue Radio.world@gmail.com.
yes, sir. And also, alternatively, they can send an email to politicsotc@gmail.com. That is politicsotc as in off the cuff at gmail.com. I do check those emails, and my friend, right now, I'm not seeing a lot of emails on this, so I hope to hear from some of your listeners and some of mine. That being said, so I'm going to say it plain, the way Malcolm X would have laid it down, that these anti-stay-at-home protests are just an exercise in white privilege and really a call for institutionalized white supremacy. They are because these measures are particularly important to communities of color. And I mean, one can say that this is just childish and sophomoric whining, but what it comes down to is that many of these anti-stay-at-home protesters, whether implicitly or explicitly, are calling for the rescinding of restrictions that would save lives, particularly lives of communities of color. That's the first thing. Second of all, many of these anti-stay-at-home protests are being organized by far right-wing forces that have been were implicated in the Tea Party, were implicated in anti-black and or rather, very protests and protest movements that have advocated for racist policies, such as building, border walls, as um, you know, uh, increasing increasing penalties that would lead to further mass incarceration, as well as, when it comes right down to it, that they're essentially saying that, well, if it affects us and keeps us from being able to have a life of convenience, then it's bad. But if we can have a life of convenience based on the fatalities of black and brown people, so be it. We don't care, right? And now, when it comes to the this tension, right? Like, outside of those protests and outside of, this very this white privilege centric perspective that is motivating all these stay at home protests, or sorry, anti stay at home protests, the system was broke to begin with. Like, let's be clear that the normal for our communities was catching hell every single day in an increasingly economically and socially unequal society. So, this pandemic actually presents us with a great opportunity, a once in a generation opportunity, which, I hate to sound cynical and really darken this, but I do feel that, given the kind of political, the kind of arrangement of the powers that be at the moment, that we are going to miss. That because our society is steeped in such inequality, such vicious inequality, and really oppressive social arrangements just across the board,